One of the first checks I ever gave back to a company was $500,000. And I had talked to the president of this company for a long time about doing duty drawback. And he just wouldn't do it. And then all of a sudden he decided to do it. And within 6 months, I handed him a check for $500,000. And he said to me, he said, that's the easiest $500,000 I've ever made in my life.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border E-commerce podcast. Aaron, today we're this episode 50.
50?
Yeah, 50 episodes. And we kind of had a couple breaks at the beginning of the year here. It's been a little more busy over the holidays than we expected, but we have a lot of content out there, and hopefully some of our YouTube shorts, which gets lots of views, are at the top of the charts right now. But we're excited to be back, and we're here with Greg. Hold on. Crap. I don't know your last name, Greg.
Greg Nielson.
Greg Nielson. Okay.
We go way back.
Yes, we do. I've known Greg. Actually, we do. But I have always called you Greg usually. Yeah. But I've known Greg for, I think since you started getting the Drawback business. I think it was, in fact, I believe you had just started.
Yeah.
It was about 7 years ago, I think, when we met up. So, maybe before Greg, we jump in, Aaron, any thoughts on the topic today, which is going to be duty drawback with Greg?
Super excited to talk about duty drawback. This is a complex topic. Excited to jump into it. One thought I had, or question I had on do you know why the baker does his duty drawback? Why would a baker do duty drawback?
I don't know.
Because he needs the dough.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That was good. Yes, I like being surprised with these when they're funny, is what I told Aaron. And then this one, he didn't disappoint.
Apropos.
Yeah. Okay, Greg, tell us, I already said, you've been in the industry about 7 years, but tell us a little bit about who you work for, maybe in general, what your business, the company you work for does, and the space. And then Aaron and I are going to have a lot of questions because we're typically talking to e-commerce companies, and because that's our typical clientele. They're doing a lot of exporting. We think about exports all day, usually for U.S. merchants or wherever the merchant is. And you think about imports all day.
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of experience in different parts of business. I worked for Pitney Bowes for almost 30 years. So I am as old as I look. And I met the president of Alliance International, the company that I currently work for. And he said, hey, you understand this drawback world. Why don't you come and work for me? And so 7 years later, I've really enjoyed this business. And because it is a way for companies to get money back that is sitting and waiting for them to get back. It's free. And it comes from the government. And so when I get money back, one of the first checks I ever gave back to a company was $500,000. And I had talked to the president of this company for a long time about doing duty drawback, and he just wouldn't do it. And then all of a sudden he decided to do it. And within 6 months, I handed him a check for $500,000. And he said to me, he said, that's the easiest $500,000 I've ever made in my life. And so it's really a business that is actually fun for me, because I'm really not selling anything. I'm really selling the opportunity for them to get money that the government has there waiting for them to get.
Yeah, that's the interesting part about this is I want to try to break this down, since this is a Decoding Cross-Border E-commerce podcast, right? So when we think of e-commerce companies, and we're going to talk specifically about the U.S. because that's where you deal with U.S. companies,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I'm understanding right, when these U.S. companies bring goods into the U.S., they're going to have to pay duty on those goods. And then many of those goods they may sell within the market here. But anything they're re-exporting back out, which would be their cross-border sales, the duty they originally paid on the import into the U.S., they can actually reclaim that back from the U.S. government. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And duty drawback, one of the interesting things, it is the oldest trade program in the United States. It started in 1789. And so, the whole concept is if a company or somebody was going to import products from another country, they need to be taxed or pay a duty or a fee, because it's taking away jobs from Americans, and they wanted to have something to control that part of the industry, and so it's nothing new. It's 250 years old, and it's not only as Aaron said, it's not only a program that somebody is paying a duty bringing to the United States, and it only gives you the opportunity to get the duty back for stuff that leaves the commerce of the United States. So everything that we buy is we are paying for the duty, and it stays here.
So this it all sounds, it's one of those things. It's too good to be true, right? Like there's most of the companies probably listening to this are not doing duty drawback. What percentage, if you were to guess, of companies out there that are eligible to get drawbacks actually get drawbacks?
It's a great question. There's billions of dollars that go back to companies in the United States every year, billions, many billions. But there's more money left on the table than there is that gets back to companies.
So I guess the question then is, if there's billions of dollars sitting on the table that goes unclaimed, why?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of small companies out there that might pay $10,000 in duty. It's not worth it for them or for us to even aid them in that process. So it's size.
So even if you're $10,000 in duty, it is the level of effort for them or you or any other company. It's just the return isn't there, the ROI.
Wait, so this is an old process. So does that mean the hoops you have to jump through are still, from the 1700s, and so it takes a lot of work to...
They haven't updated the system since then?
I don't know. Have they?
Well, the government won't even accept claims that are very, very small. I mean, if you tried to do a $10,000 claim, they probably wouldn't even accept it. And so it's kind of a both ways.
They have their own de minimis.
Yeah. Interesting. So what does the process look like then? So it sounds like you have to apply and be accepted to be able to even do this?
Well, our process at Alliance International is the company I work for. Our process is to evaluate if there is an opportunity. And how that process looks is that we get the imports out of an ACE program that would tell us what the HTS or what the products that are being imported and the total duties paid on those products. Then we get an export report or an AES report that would say these are the products that are being exported under those HTS. So we do HTS level evaluation to see and that's kind of the top level.
And you're looking
process.
at it at a company level, right? Yes. In this case.
Yes.
So you're talking to a company, they're interested, you're logging into ACE and doing your own determination, not just from the data that they're telling you, you're checking the actual system.
Well, our first level is to do, I guess the very highest level is ask the question, how much duty do you pay in a particular year? Mm-hmm. And if that number is depending on that number, then we dive in a little further.
What is that number roughly usually, because I think for our audience that's listening, some might be like, this sounds great, but at what point is a certain amount of duty become interesting? And it can be a range, right? Kind of.
Sure. Well, a lot of that is determined by not how easy it is, because there's different products that are easier than others to identify. So like if we're talking about drawback under the direct ID, we're talking about motorcycles. There's a real high-end Italian motorcycle. I can't.
Ducati. Is it Ducati or Aprilia?
Okay. That's it. And so when that comes into the country, the machine itself is $20,000. I'll say it's $20,000, and the duty that they paid on it was $1,200, $1,400, and that is a direct ID type of process where it's serialized. So that you can say, I brought in that motorcycle and that motorcycle left.
It's just the same thing that came in was exactly what left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's a direct ID type of a drawback claim.
So those ones are interesting. And then also we talked earlier before this, but Section 301 has kind of been impactful too, because that's the additional tariff of 25%. Am I correct? Coming from China?
There's two things that probably enhanced drawback and is in the last 8 to 10 years. Number one is in 2015, it was passed the TEFTA ruling that allowed companies to do drawback at the HTS level. Before then, it was more cumbersome. It was more difficult.
What would they use if it wasn't at the HTS level?
You would have to have description. You would use HTS, but you would have to have descriptions of those products.
So like almost matching to the SKU.
Yes, yes. And batch numbers. That was more difficult. Now at the HTS level, it made it much simpler. And that was in 2015, and it took effect in December of 2018. So since 2018, it's the Simplification Act for drawback, and it really did. It simplified the process for everybody.
And it had to simplify it for CBP, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. And that was for them.
Yeah. Because at first, even though they realize they're probably going to give out more drawbacks, they're thinking this doesn't scale what we're trying to do right now.
Yes. And they did miss on how much value it was going to, how much money it was going to.
So they actually they gave out more than the benefit of automation
for sure
gave them. Okay,
for sure.
The return.
But is there an element where they're wanting to encourage the exports?
Oh, sure. That's the big reason for one of the big reasons for drawback is to encourage companies to export product.
Yeah. So even though they're giving that duty back, they still want to encourage additional sales for companies in the US.
For sure. And so the TEFTA ruling that took effect in 2018 was very instrumental in simplifying drawback. Then you take that to what happened in 2018 when the Section 301 tariff affected the China imports.
And this was Trump, right, at the time?
This is President Trump. And so it just, normal duties on some of the products might have been 1, 2, 3%, or maybe 0. And then the first part of the Section 301 was targeted at aluminum and steel. That was the big target. And then it became electronics and intellectual properties was one of. And then they created the Trump organization created 4 different lists that said, here's list 1, and if you change your practices, China, we'll only charge an additional 10%. And then nothing happened. They didn't move. So they created another list 2. And list 1 went from 10 to 25. List 2 went from 10 to 25. So now we're down to list 4, which almost includes everything that is imported from China.
It feels like whenever, I'm talking to anyone that's bringing something in from China, they're getting hit with that penalty tariff, the additional tariff of, so if they were paying 0 to 5% before, they're getting hit with an additional 25% on top of whatever percentage the standard duty rate is for that item. So all of a sudden you go from, hey, duty's not that interesting to, oh, wow, that's a lot to reclaim if I'm exporting this product. For
sure. We've had companies in the electronics world that the duty rate was so low that they didn't even pay attention to the duty drawback programs. But now when the electronics went from 1 or 2% up to 25, 26, 27%, and you're buying millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product, now you have a very viable program. And then also, and now you can look back, you can go back 5 years if you haven't had a program. So all of those China tariffs are still available almost to the beginning of the 2018 when they started to affect the China imports. But they're falling off because that 5-year window, if I have an import today, tomorrow there's no opportunity for that. And the federal government now has that money there. So tomorrow, every day with the 5-year look back, that there's a line in the sand that says you either do it now or you're not going to.
You can still go back 5 years, but not any further. And
5 years from tomorrow.
Yeah, from
It's
tomorrow. Wow.
It's been really interesting to watch. When you talk about these tariffs that were added in for Chinese-made goods, everybody had to adjust their behavior, and it was a boom for things like duty drawback. And then it also goes back to our previous episodes where we talked about the U.S. de minimis and how companies were trying to skirt them all together by just setting up distribution across the border in Canada and Mexico. But it's really the exact same catalyst: is how do we avoid these heavy tariffs, or how do we reclaim them? And that's been a big boom for the duty drawback industry, as well as for other industries that are out there. Where do you see that going from here? Is that something you see? I mean, Trump just got reelected into office. Do you still see that continuing and still being a big advantage for people to look into duty drawback?
Well, because of the 301 and because of there's more customers today, and so it's a more widely talked about thing, right? We're not hurting for customers right now, but we're always looking for good customers that. And again, I get very excited about getting money back to companies because it's free.
So now walk us through like practically like how this works, right? So someone's listening to this, they're like, I want to do this. If they wanted to do this themselves, how would a company get a duty drawback from beginning to end? Sure.
Well, it's not impossible to do it in-house for companies. It's not impossible. You have to have a broker's license. I mean, that's like the key to it. So
so most people aren't checking that box, but keep going.
Right. And a lot of companies that start it, it's very difficult to know all of the rules, because when we talk very simply about, okay, there's an imported product and you export that product, you can get the duty back. There are, I'm sure in 1789, right, this was a handwritten document and it was probably a couple of pages. But now the drawback book, or the rules to drawback, is very robust. And to understand all of that, we take over programs all of the time that there's been millions of dollars left on the table because they didn't apply the right process.
So a lot of these companies will attempt it themselves and then end up maybe. But if they have that broker in place, do they then have to go through like a registration process to do this, or can they just start submitting their documentation to CBP? Like, what's the?
Well, there's a great question. Typically, the process looks like is you do the analysis and see that there is an opportunity.
So step one, check is there an opportunity to get a decent amount of money back? Okay,
right. And then there's different provisions. There's like if you're going to have a manufacturing process, that you're buying a dutied product from China or anywhere else, and you're putting it into something, you actually have to submit the bill of materials to the government, and then they do their own testing to make sure that the amounts, and this kind of goes into the chemicals. There's a lot of the MLMs in this area,
multi-level marketing,
that put together products that will have the bottle cap and stopper are all imported. Maybe an oil that is going in the product is dutied. So you tell the government, here is the bill of materials. This is how much duty was paid in that particular bottle. And then and let's say that was 10 million of those. Then you basically say, here's my import duties. Here's the exports that left. And you tell the government, here's the program. And the manufacturing process to get the government to approve a manufacturing drawback sometimes will take as long as a year to 18 months.
That's to get the money back.
No, that's just to get it approved.
Oh, to get it approved that you can get money back. Is that the actual registration process for the business? Is that the same thing? To be registered?
The registration process will take maybe 90 days.
Okay, so 1, I'm going to do an analysis. 2, I'm going to register. Let's say that takes 90
Yep.
days. And then 3 is the approval for the type of goods. Is that
They approve many different provisions.
got it? Depending on the provision, you might need approval.
Yeah, you have to get an approval for a J1 program.
What if you
J2.
just are exporting like apparel? Is there a big approval process for that, or is it not? Okay. So depending on what it is, it might be super easy to get approved. All right. So now that let's say, okay, I'm registered, my product's good, I'm approved, I've done my analysis. Step 4, I want to get my money back. What do I have to submit to get it back?
Sure. Well, the process looks like I provide the import documentation that it proves that I imported it, the 7501. And that shows the duty, the type of product. And then I on the export side, I'm doing the same thing. I'm proving that I exported that product to another country.
And 1-to-1, the HS code. If I imported these HS codes and I re-export basically the same item or HS code, it's eligible.
Yes. An example of that also, when they went to the HTS, is use an example. You can import a Heineken beer and export a Coors Light, and you can use that in a drawback because they have the same HTS code.
And that was the simplification back in
2015,
18. Okay, yeah.
And so that it opened up a tremendous amount of opportunity at the HTS.
So it didn't have to be like 1-to-1 on the item. It went from 1-to-1 on the HS code,
Exactly
HTS.
right.
So you say an HS code because we're doing exports, but US, HTS, that's the...
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say I get that documentation submitted. What is submitted? It's you said the paperwork of the export.
Yeah, they've accepted you as a participant in the Drawback program.
Yep.
They said, "Yep, you have a program," and then you provide the documentation,
like the import
and the export documentation, and then it's a very short process. When you get to that point, it's very simple. Then it's almost 30 to 45 days. You're getting a check back from the federal.
All right.
government.
Okay. So
it's the front end that is
what amount of companies that decide to do this on their own successfully even do it, would you say?
A very small amount.
Okay. So they're usually going to someone like Alliance
they'll get frustrated and they don't know how the paperwork should be done, or it doesn't look right, and they'll process one claim, and then they go and usually it's a person or two people, and they may leave the company, and then they have no tribal knowledge.
Well, and then there's going to be things like audits and things that'll happen where they say, hey, the government may come and want you to prove something, right? And then you got to have all your ducks in a row to be able to go through that process.
And our company handles all of the desk audits. The desk audits are very low level, and but we've already gathered all the documentation to provide them if they have a desk audit.
So do you actually, when you submit the claim or for the drawback, do you actually provide the documentation, or do they just say submit it? We may come back to you and ask for an audit.
Yes. I mean, you're right there. It is submit it, and then if they want an audit,
they're expecting that you have that backing of what you're sending, but they're not asking for every single commercial invoice on every single export.
They ask for 2 transactions up front. So I approve 2 imports and a couple of exports, and that's what it's going to look like.
Got it.
Then we submit the claims. And if it's usually by size, right? If it's a very large claim, they're going to be more robust in looking at the paperwork. And they'll say, I want 2 more imports, 2 more exports. They're testing your ability to provide the documentation that it's there.
So Aaron, as you think about this, what type of e-commerce companies do you think this starts like who's the fit for it in the e-commerce world, would you say? I have a few thoughts, but I want to get yours.
Just you doing it in general?
Yeah, like we're talking, we have an audience. They're typically doing e-commerce. And when do you think they actually want to start considering something like this? What types of?
I think you've got to have a decent amount of volume that you're
volume,
exporting.
yeah.
I will say that it sure sounds like I wouldn't want to do this in-house. I'd want to be hiring someone to help.
Yeah. Wouldn't you think you want it to be? It's probably going to be your brand, right? You're not a distributor of another. Of a different importer. Not that there's not ways to do that, but it's like if you're, let's just, I don't know.
Well, I can talk from personal experience. Greg tried selling me on this before, my past job. Like we had this conversation, and we went through the test of like, okay, it's difficult to justify it, even though we had a fair amount of volume going out, but we had a lot of layers and distribution to get to us, distributors. Yeah. The manufacturer, the distributors, all the way down.
Because you didn't buy it and manufacture it yourself.
Right. We had some
of that.
Some of it we did. And then this is, this is also before the Section 301 tariffs.
But if 100% of what you were selling was imported and manufactured by you, would this have been more?
Absolutely.
So someone that might not have a lot of SKUs and you're just like, okay, we have our Halloween shop store, right? And I don't think we do enough exports to justify this, but it's we're manufacturing our own costumes, right? So they come in, and then that might, if you had a ton of volume doing something like that and you were exporting it.
Yeah, you're bringing in, if you're the one importing all the goods,
I'm importing it.
It's super easy.
It's the majority of my volume. Could make sense. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other one I think too that would make sense is if you were also a distributor of your product. So you don't just sell direct to consumers. So we have a lot of e-commerce companies that work with us that are large, and yes, they're selling direct to consumer, whether it's like Funko Pop or whatever, right? Like they sell direct to consumer, but they're also doing distribution to, they're doing exports that are just direct to a reseller in that other country, a bulk shipment. And so when we think about e-commerce, we're always thinking about individual, but really what I think someone wants to entertain this is you do both. You're doing individual exports as an e-commerce company, but you're also doing bulk direct selling to distributors.
Basically, it doesn't matter why it left the country.
Yep, doesn't matter.
The country, right?
But it for the process itself, that kind of scenario where you have a bulk shipment that's going to, I always use Australia. I don't know why I do, but there's a bulk shipment that you're sending to a distributor in Australia. Then that's a scenario that is an easier. The individual shipments are difficult.
And then what did I already ask this? What amount of duty then is it, like what dollar of duty paid does it make sense? Is it over, did we say over $10,000? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think the question is usually I can validate at least if they have a program in about a 10-minute conversation. And if you know how much duty you paid in a year, and the percentage of the product that's being exported. So if you paid $1 million in duty and you exported 30% of it, you have a $300,000 claim.
That's interesting.
And if it was, and it's very easy to get the helicopter sky view of what it is. And so that number's always, there's some MLM type of companies that, let's say they pay $1 million in duty. Well, 80% of it leaves the country. So that's a complete, every scenario has a different answer to the question. It's not a cut and dry answer to the question.
Yeah.
And things that are not, one of the rules is that with the NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico, if a product is being manufactured in the United States, anything that goes to Canada and Mexico, there's no opportunity.
Yep.
But there is an opportunity if you're bringing in a product and not changing it. It comes in and I just export it out. That's available.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And so every one of them becomes that math problem. And every one of the scenarios that we look at the provision that needs to be used to maximize the opportunity, and it makes a big difference.
So I think the moral of the story is, if you've got a fair amount of exports going out, you should talk to somebody like yourself to figure out the math and see if it makes sense.
If you call Aaron and I, we're just sending you over to Greg. But this has been just, I think it's fascinating. I could talk about this for a really long time, but this is any other thoughts, as we finish up here about just duty drawback in general that you think might be interesting, or you'd like to, that we might have missed?
Well, I think we're trying to simplify as much as we can here, right? And it really is very simple at the basic level of it. But when you get into it, I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a drawback program for most of the airlines that import a jet fuel. So they import the jet fuel, put it on their airplane. Soon as they leave the commerce of America, it is a duty drawback program because it's now being exported and used as it leaves the commerce of the United States. So there are so many opportunities that.
Do you have to keep track of how full your tank is when you cross the country
100%.
Wow.
100%.
Oh, that's wild.
And a lot of these things, like we mentioned in this, was that it's to help companies get money back. And all of these rulings, like I said, in 1789, right? It was probably a handwritten piece of paper, and it was good. Now, if somebody wants to change a ruling, they have to submit their change to the government, and they evaluate it. And there's been many changes. Now there's huge changes that are happening all the time. There's going to be more, but I think with Mr. Trump going back in office, I think it really will improve because it all depends on how much duty you're paying to get it into the United States.
I think I did have one question that would be relevant for the listeners, which is, in this industry, how are the fees structured? How does it work?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do is we do an analysis there's many reasons we do it. One of it is to be able to price what our services would cost, and to just throw out a number. It's either going to be too high or too low if you're just guessing. So we do a very extensive analysis to say, okay, you haven't done a drawback program for the past 5 years. Your program is worth X. And we know how much labor and time it's going to take for our staff to process the claims. And then to be competitive with the rest of the drawback world, then we price that in, and they can be from 1% to 25%. I mean, there's a big gap in there.
But really what we're talking about is it's only a charge of whatever you get back.
So they're not paying you a flat fee or it just comes out of the total return it's free money for them in a way, and it doesn't cost them anything out of their pocket because it's just money coming back and you take a portion of it.
Zero.
Yep.
I mean, we get if the claim doesn't go through, and which they do. I shouldn't even think that they don't. If we're going to process a claim, you'll get the money.
It's going to come through. Well,
and we've done the legwork, and we know the process, and so like we mentioned, the manufacturing, we're not going to collect a dime until the government approves a manufacturing drawback, and that might be a year and a half from now. And so we don't collect anything until you get a check.
Yeah, no, that's been great. Well, Greg, thanks again for coming on the podcast. It's great to be back this year, Aaron, and looking forward to some more here in the future, but appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.
All right, bye.